Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Adult Learning Conference. Apologies for the slightly delayed start this morning, just can you believe it, some traffic problems. Firstly, welcome and thank you for coming this morning, such an early start for our conference. Really grateful for everyone attending. There's about 150 people who will be taking part across the various platforms this morning. So really grateful for all of our participants, particularly our speakers. And as you'll see from the agenda, we literally do have speakers from across the world this morning. So hopefully it's going to be an interesting conference. We decided to focus this year on learning for wellbeing. Given the pandemic, we wanted to really focus on something which learners are talking to us about their mental health and their well-being. We wanted to really showcase the work that adult learning can do in supporting people at this difficult time. Just a few housekeeping things before we start. To say the event is being recorded on YouTube. For those of you, most of you watching on Slido, if you want to post questions, you can do so in the chat, and those questions will be moderated and asked by the chairs of the various panels throughout the day. Just a reminder to all our speakers who are on Zoom, if they're not speaking, please put yourselves on mute and turn your cameras off. And also you'll hopefully see in your agendas that there are a series of workshops, 2 workshops following the conference. There's about an hour's break in between the main plenary and the conference, and the workshops rather, and you can sign up to those. You'll see the links, or been in the briefings, but they'll also be posted in the chat a little bit later on today. Just before I introduce our first speaker, I wanted to sort of just say a couple of words really about some very sad news the adult learning community in Wales heard just over a week ago. And that was the passing of the former chair of Cymru, Hal Francis, former MP, historian, but a lifelong activist for adult learning. I just wanted to sort of just comment really on Hal's contribution, and just to say what a huge role he played in establishing Cymru, particularly after devolution, and really establishing our identity as an organisation. We will be looking to work with other organisations that he was involved in to help mark his contribution after the family funeral's taken place, but over the next sort of couple of months, working with other organisations, just to do a short event to mark his contribution. But I didn't want to let that pass today, and just say all our thoughts with his many friends and with his family at a really difficult time. Okay, I'm really pleased though to introduce our first speaker this morning. It's one of our Rhiannon Norfolk's one of our 2019, I think I've got the date right, Inspire Award winners. It's a remarkable story. It was a brilliant story at the time, but actually I think the story and the journey Rhiannon's been on in the last kind of year or so is even more remarkable really, and just where she's gone. So I'm not going to tell too much about Rhiannon's stories. I'll leave that to her. But just very, very pleased to welcome you and to open the conference as our first speaker, Rhiannon.
Oh, diolch yn fawr iawn, David. Helo, bawb. Pan ces I fy gofyn I ddod I siarad am fy morofiadau ers iddi ennill y gof a dechreuannu, roedd cyfle I edrych yn ôl dros yr 20 mis diwetha. So when I was asked to come and talk about my experiences since winning the Starting Out Award in 2019, it's been an opportunity to have a look back over the last 20 months. And I think where I was when I won that award, I was 8 months back into learning Welsh after having been away for 13 years and having felt that I'd failed at learning Welsh. I'd tried and I'd not got anywhere, and I'd not really understood it, and it hadn't felt like it had come together. But I managed to take that step back into learning, and it was coming along a lot better this time. And that had given me a really good feeling of, actually, now I set a baseline in the past, and now I'm going to build up on it. So I was just about to sit my Silva in the foundation level exam. I'd been off long-term sick after having had a breakdown, and I'd go on to have my contract terminated because of long-term ill health. And Welsh had brought opportunities for me. Daeth Cymraeg a chyfloedd mawr iawn I fi. It helped me keep my brain working while I was off sick. It was a social opportunity, an opportunity to make friends and get to know people, because I'd moved to the area and then come off sick quite quickly. So I didn't really know people in the area. So it was a brilliant opportunity. It gave me feelings of achievement, that I was making progress, moving forwards, despite what was going on in other areas of my life. And it gave me some structure to my week. I knew where my lesson was, and that helped me. Again, while off sick, you lose some of that. So it really gave me such wonderful opportunities. And moving forwards after the awards, the next year I added in some additional Welsh classes. I started a jewellery making and silversmithing course at Llun Hall in Cardiff, as well as doing day courses in photography and crafts with veil courses, all the while these things helped me work on my health. And then COVID came along, and COVID has changed all of our stories. My COVID wedi newid y straeon I gyd. And lockdown brought the feelings of isolation, courses closed, and if they were happening mostly online. And I know how much effort has gone into making those things happen online in a very short space of time. And on behalf of learners in Wales, adult learners, I just want to say a huge, huge thank you to everyone who was involved in making that happen, because it was a huge ask and the things that happened were just absolutely amazing. So thank you. And it has been a really difficult period, but for the sake of my mental health, I've had to think of some of the positives that have come out of it. So there's been all sorts of opportunities that have come up that maybe wouldn't have come up without COVID. So for example, things like conferences and lectures and that sort of thing have been online, which has actually made them far more accessible. For example, things like the Hay Literature Festival, Hay on Wye. There were things that I wanted to go to, which I was able to do because they were online, that I'd have never been able to do if it had happened in the flesh. I wouldn't have been able to repeatedly travel up to Hay on several different days for these different lectures. So that was a wonderful opportunity, and that sparked interest in all sorts of different things. And I went to things that maybe I wouldn't have gone to otherwise. Just things that I thought, that's interesting. I'm not sure if it's interesting enough for me to have gone to it. And then I went virtually and it grabbed me. I think there's been things that have been more accessible without thinking about things like travel time, the actual physicality of having to do that traveling. Things, for me, disabled access is important. And so I haven't had to worry, is it going to be an accessible event in terms of being able to get there? So that's been fantastic. Some courses that have moved online, for example, I've done courses with Cynhadledd, the National Writing Centre for Wales, and Llun, where I was hoping to go for a residential Welsh course, and unfortunately that wasn't able to happen, but being able to do that online. Learn Welsh has almost wholesale moved online for the moment, with a few exceptions where there's been the possibility of having a few face-to-face courses, but for the most part. And that's given me the wonderful opportunities looking at the different courses that the different Learn Welsh centres offer. So for example, looking at summer schools, I was able to do one with Learn Welsh North East Wales. And again, I wouldn't have been able to do that if it had been in the flesh, but virtually it was brilliant. I was able to attend from home, and it was one that was the best suited for me in terms of the hours and how it all sort of fitted together and the length of the course. And it was wonderful to be able to attend that. And another thing that's happened is we've had to look at different ways of celebrating things. So, for example, just at the beginning of this month was Dydd Music Cymru, Welsh Music Day, an opportunity to celebrate Welsh language music. And I was really, really fortunate on behalf of learners from Learn Welsh, the National Learn Welsh Centre, to interview Rhys Marion, internationally famous singer. And it was just a fantastic opportunity. And again, who knows if that opportunity would have come up in a world without COVID. So things that I had thought about doing, I was doing just for enjoyment. I'd always thought that learning Welsh would be something that would help my employability. But things like the craft courses I was doing in photography, that was something I was doing for me, for enjoyment. But actually, that's turned into something. Since, as my mum says, I can't keep every single thing I make. The things that I've been learning to make through my jewellery courses and then playing at home, I've started a small business to sell my jewellery. So Welsh has then certainly helped my employability, as I've recently started as a Welsh tutor with Learn Welsh the Vale. And through that, I'm still learning, as well as still doing my own Welsh courses to develop my Welsh, and I'm now teaching, but I'm also taking a teaching course, one that's designed to teach me how to teach Welsh to adults. And I'm doing an ECDL course as well to be able to make sure I'm up with my technology to then hopefully be able to teach people if they want to be able to learn that through the medium of Welsh. So I'm now straddling both sides of adult learning as both a tutor and a student. And I hope that I never stop learning. And what I've been thinking is, how can we keep the positives of the increased opportunities that have come about during these COVID times while getting the positives of the face-to-face learning? And someone who's been really inspirational to me has been my Welsh tutor, Anne Davies, who has been running what she calls a rice and chips course in Learn Welsh the Vale, where when we've been able to, we've had people actually in the classroom, but it's also happening on Zoom at the same time. So if, for example, you're not able to come in, you're not feeling it's appropriate for you to come in, you're still part of the same course. So that's an idea, and I'm sure there's all sorts of different ideas, and I'm really looking forward to hearing more ideas today and working alongside you to make these things a reality. So diolch yn fawr iawn, thank you ever so much, a daliwch ati, keep at it. Diolch yn fawr.
Thanks, Rhiannon. That's, I mean, I think your story from going from learner starting out to now as a tutor in the Vale is absolutely fantastic. And congratulations, and thank you for sharing some of your story this morning. And let's echo your comments as well about thank you to the sector as well. I think it's really important just to say, I think that the way that the sector responded, and not just adult learning, but also schools and colleges, universities, just responding to that, to the crisis, and trying to deliver some form of continuity of learning has been fantastic. So completely support your comments. Right, can I move on then to our next speaker? I'm going to ask our chair, Jeff Greenwich, just to introduce the Minister.
Okay, thank you, David. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Does ddim bosib I mi siarad yn Gymraeg fel Rhiannon. I know I can speak in Welsh like Rhiannon, but I'd like to welcome you here today and welcome the Minister of Education, Kirsty Williams, for her address. But before I do that, I'd like just to say a few words in recognition of the Minister's support for education and skills over the years. I recall back in 2011 when, as a leader of Liberal Democrats, you agreed to support the Welsh Government's budget on the basis of securing a Welsh premium, which was an extra £20 million to spend on the education of the poorest pupils in Wales. And then again, we saw your ability to see across departments, across government, and where you supported the establishment of that £50 million intermediate care fund to drive the integration of health, social services and housing. And you've always been at the forefront of curriculum reform in Wales and have been very supportive of us here at Learning and Work Cymru in our advocacy for adult and family learning. You went to Monkton House and you saw how that primary school was very much embedded within the community and supporting family learning provision there. And again, I personally thank you for, on behalf of adult learners in Wales, for that inspirational Raymond Williams lecture back, I think it was in 2018, where you shared your thoughts on developing a culture of lifelong learning and the wider value of adult education. And this was followed up the following year by the Adult Learner Awards, where you presented the overall winner. And I recall you sharing some thoughts over dinner on the concept of lifelong learning support for adults. And it's sometimes, politicians share these thoughts, but then we recognize that you continued with this and you recognize the widening of access of part-time higher education, where you oversaw the new funding support and you actually brought in that introduction to the right for lifelong learning. It's rare for a politician to connect with people at both an intellectual and emotional level, and you've done that. And, of course, you'll be missed by the education skills, the lifelong learning sector here in Wales. As a resident in Brecon and Radishire, I'll no doubt be writing to you on issues of support for the local community, as I've done over the past few years. no doubt annoying you with my letters. But it's with heartfelt thanks from the adult learning sector that we ask you today to share your thoughts in your keynote address. So Kirsty Williams, thank you, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts on adult learning. Thank you.
Well, diolch yn fawr, Jeff, diolch o galon, and bore da pawb. Thank you so much for inviting me to the conference this morning. And can I begin by thanking Rhiannon for sharing her story and her positivity. Rhiannon has shown very clearly this morning how resilience, hard work and determination can lead to success in learning, and how it goes a long way to improve health and well-being, as well as social benefits and opportunities. And like you, Rhiannon, I hope in the rush to get back to normal, we don't lose some of the things that we've learned over these last 12 months. And can I just reinforce what Rhiannon said about the amazing Hey On Why Festival going online? I know the organisers are hoping to do the same this year. So thank you very much. Diolch o galon, Rhiannon, da iawn, bendigedig, and just keep on going, as you said. Colleagues, no one could have predicted the juggernaut that is COVID, and our lens, well, that's shifted significantly. As we heard from Rhiannon, we've all had to adjust our working, living and social lives and the ways in which we teach and learn. And I'm proud of the unyielding support of everyone in education who has made sure that learning has been able to continue in some form, despite the challenges that we have all faced. And I want to extend my gratitude to all of you working in the adult learning sector in Wales. Just like Rhiannon, your resilience and determination and support for learners during this past year has been crucial, especially for those learners who have needed your support the most. So thank you. As David said, as he opened this conference, we as the Welsh education family lost someone last week who did so much to support learners throughout his lifetime. Hywel Francis was a pioneer, a professor, and of course a parliamentarian. He was someone who did the thinking before he did the politics, and that's all too rare these days. His leadership, both intellectually and professionally, took Swansea University's adult education provision to new generations and communities, and was always focused on learners as active citizens. Sometimes education debates are too narrowly focused on the transaction of a skill for a job, and of course that is an important element. But for a functioning democracy and society, nothing is so essential as universal and lifelong access to and development of the experiences, knowledge and skills needed for true active citizenship. And Hywel knew this. He knew this from his own history and roots in the Dylais Valley, a Welsh-speaking working-class coalfield community. And as Rob Humphreys reminded me, Hywel was also a Welsh internationalist. Indeed, his work connecting the South Wales Valley's experience with that of Appalachia speaks to my own family history. I'm sure that many of you as well share that history. My grandfather left Llanelli in the South Wales coalfield for the mines of West Virginia. He said he could ruin his lungs for more money there than he could back at home. Hywel saw the connections, the shared stories and experiences, and the common culture of democratic voices that is crucial to real civic partnership between a university, its community, and its stories. And that's true whether that is in Ohio, Oxford, or on Llun. He was a brilliant educationalist and achieved so much, and it's truly a sad loss to education and to the civic vision of universities and to the idea of an international Wales. My deepest sympathies are extended to Mair and his family, but diolch Hywel, diolch o galon. In the spirit of what I've just described, I think we can be proud of the progress that we have made in the last 5 years in lifelong learning and adult education. Part-time student numbers have seen a huge expansion. An official figure shows an 81% increase in the OU student numbers alone since I introduced student finance reform. Our Made in Wales professional learning accounts have supported over 2,000 individuals thanks to £15.5 million of Welsh Government investment and a strong partnership with our colleges. And we're widening access in a radical way to postgraduate study across our nation. Much has been done, but as always, there is still more to do. Now, many of you will know that the progressive agreement between myself and the First Minister included a commitment to explore a Welsh right to lifelong learning. And I was pleased to see this policy reflected in the recent Commission on the College of the Future. However, I would be the first to admit that despite our many programmes, funding and initiatives to support lifelong learning, progress on a right or an entitlement has been too slow. As with other areas of policy, this last year has had an impact on how we've been able or unable to take certain things forward. But I would urge colleagues here today to keep working with the government to help us move forward in a way that such an entitlement can move off the page and become real and transform people's lives. And I believe it could be a world-leading initiative. The Adult Learning Network has also made significant progress in responding to the restructuring of adult learning following my statement in July 2019. Despite the challenges, a revised funding and planning model has been introduced to ensure a fairer distribution of funds across our nation. Now, again, I'd admit that we haven't been able to give as much time as I would have liked to consider whether an existing organisation could take the role of a national body for adult learning. But I'm committed to explore the feasibility of this, and I do hope that my successor will continue to pursue this vision. I'm sure that progress made by local authorities will have paved the way for long-term sustainability of localised adult learning in Wales, and I do believe it is right to explore what benefits a national body could add to that endeavour. And finally, I remain convinced that bringing post-16 education into one organisation will allow us to meet any future challenges and see greater diversity of opportunity, particularly in a post-COVID world. Our proposed Commission for Tertiary Education and Research will have the operational freedom to determine how best to fulfil its duties of securing facilities for further education and training in Wales. And the draft bill demonstrates how provision can be flexible to the needs of individuals and communities, using alternative locations and approaches, and innovative support to enable flexible, short-term and part-time learning opportunities. I'm ever so grateful for the responses received during a time when the sector is under significant pressure, and the summary of consultation responses will be published later this week. As mentioned by Jeff, and I hope many of you will know, we're also on the verge of passing new legislation for a new national curriculum. It focuses on the development of ethical, informed young people ready to contribute and to be citizens of Wales and the world. And as I've said before, and indeed as David has pointed out before, over the next period, this will mean that our education system, including the post-compulsory sector, must also be focused on shared citizenship, common culture, and empowering all with the knowledge and the skills to change society for the better. And as we review the future of qualifications, exams and assessment, learning credits, tertiary provision and more, these purposes have to be at the forefront of our thinking. Now, I understand there's much useful discussion to be had and focus workshops. Whilst I'm afraid I will have to leave you, my officials will remain present to ensure that the key points are captured and fed back to me. And on a personal note, I'd like to say thank you. Thank you to the Learning and Work Institute and the wider adult education community for your support and challenges to me during my time as the Minister. I hope that you consider that I have been a friend, sometimes a critical friend, in putting lifelong learning at the heart of how we think, plan and support our national mission for education reform. Please keep up the good work and keep that relentless focus on social justice, raising standards for all, and tackling lowered expectations wherever they exist. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your conference. Diolch pawb, diolch fawr.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you for that address. Would you be able to take a couple of questions before you depart?
Yes, of course, Jeff, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. I think there were a couple coming through the chat, but whilst waiting for those, I just thought, we know from our experience of the last year or so that adult learners studying within the adult and community learning community are also those same individuals that have suffered, that found themselves struggling financially, they're facing digital exclusion, and they're suffering from poor mental health and well-being. So my question really is, how do we better meet the needs of adult learners and give them the support they need to continue learning during and after the pandemic?
Well, thank you, Jeff. And I absolutely recognise, the specific challenges that some adult learners have been facing. And Rhiannon talked, didn't she, about the sense of isolation and how potentially, that has made life difficult. And Rhiannon has been able to overcome that, but we recognise that some adult learners have not been in such a fortunate position. So I think we've been able to support in some ways issues around digital exclusion with additional investment. And the Welsh Government has supported key services such as the Community Advice and Listening Line. And that's a mental health helpline for Wales, which is a free phone number and text service available 24 hours a day, 365 days of the week for anyone who's got concerns about their own well-being or indeed the well-being of a family member or friend. And that's a confidential advice and support service. But I think now, as we begin our first tentative steps out of this particular period of lockdown, we're beginning to, to really develop the deep thinking behind a COVID resilience plan. And that's to look at, the impact of COVID and learning and education in all areas. And we've recently put in place an online survey to be able to gain an understanding of the impact of COVID-19 and learners' experience of well-being, the downsides and the upsides, because as we heard from Rhiannon, there's definitely been challenges, but there has been different opportunities and different ways for people to engage. So that survey and the findings of that are going to help inform future delivery of post-16 learning, particularly in relation to the further development and mainstreaming of blended learning, so that there are different opportunities and different ways for people to engage. And I think we have to look at it from, I'm very keen we don't look at it from a deficit model. Learning has undoubtedly been interrupted, but it has carried on. Again, as Rhiannon has referenced, and it's about making sure that we don't constantly talk about the need for catch-up or learning loss, but recognise that interruption, recognise that everybody's situation and story will be different, but looking to be able to respond positively to that, but also to incorporate the new learning that we've done during this time, recognising that the old normal didn't work for everybody, and the new normal gives us a chance to reset and to do something better.
Thank you, Minister. While I unmute myself from that, thank you for that sort of focus on positivity and on the learning experience. Clearly, blended learning is something which we've used now, and we need to continue and to move forward. I've got a question in the chat from one of the delegates, and the question is, what one action would the Minister like to see the next Welsh Government take to support lifelong learning?
Well, Jeff, if I can refer back to what I've just said in my speech, I really hope that the new person who was lucky enough to have this job, and it really is the best job in the government, I believe, is to make real on that promise and that ambition of a right to lifelong learning, and drawing together all the different streams and activity that we have into making that meaningful. And I hold my hands up. We had hoped to make some further progress this year on that. COVID has interrupted that work, but I really hope that the new minister will pick up that challenge and work with the sector to understand how we make that real. And I understand there are dissenting voices out there, but I absolutely believe, in the purposes of the new Commission on Tertiary Education. We are too small a nation to have institutions competing against each other, duplicating. We need, as we have done during COVID, all shoulders to the wheel approach that is relentlessly focused on individuals and students and learners to allow them to move seamlessly through that system at times which is relevant and works for them. And so I really do hope that the new government will pick up the draft bill. By all means, you know, reflect on the consultations as we're doing at the moment, make amendments to that bill. But I do believe that bringing the sector and a single planning authority, I think, is absolutely crucial to the way forward.
Thank you for those thoughts about that, about collaboration and that seamless view, and looking to see how different parts of the sector can work together. That brings me along to thinking about the community and thinking about how do you see community learning being developed within community venues after the pandemic?
Well, I think, you know, absolutely there is a role for, you know, bringing that learning as localized to people as possible, especially for those individuals, you know, who have been out of learning before and are taking those tentative steps. You know, doing that in a community that you're familiar with, you know, is obviously hugely beneficial. But as we've just heard from Rhiannon, I think we need to combine that with a new approach to accessible learning. You know, as we've just heard from Rhiannon, you know, not all venues are potentially as accessible even within the community. There are people for very, very good reasons who feel that they can't participate in that kind of atmosphere. But actually, a combination of that and blended learning really gives us the opportunity to open up learning to even more individuals. So, but yeah, absolutely, there's got to be a place of working with, you know, different venues. One of the most uplifting things that I've done this last year, and believe me, there haven't been many uplifting moments. They really, really haven't been. But I recently met with a group of mums who are on a project that is working out of Cymdeithas High School. And you talked about the experience that I had with David down in Pembrokeshire in a primary school. Well, this is, you know, community focused learning based around a high school here in Cymdeithas. And that just so positive, so uplifting, making a huge difference to families, both the children who are being better supported in their education, but also their mums and dads and carers who are now also, you know, learning and working with that school. And I would love to see, you know, we've taken some tentative steps about having a capital fund that local authorities can apply to, you know, to build community facilities alongside their schools so that we can get the community learning alongside children. And, you know, that kind of model, I think, is transformative for the lives of everybody involved. The school, which sees better parental engagement, better outcomes for kids, but also, you know, in this case, it was mostly mums who were, you know, learning new skills and then translating those skills into new employment opportunities or simply social opportunities where they were getting out of the house or meeting people that they would never have done so. And yeah, more of that, you know, would be absolutely amazing. And as I say, it's one of the most uplifting things that I've been able to do this year is meet those women, extraordinary women, working alongside Cymdeithas High School. Brilliant.
Thank you for those thoughts. I get a real sense that, you know, you're pressing the next government to look to that right for lifelong learning, but you're also pressing the sector to collaborate more, bring schools, colleges, and community learning venues together, and to make the most of the technology. Can I push you a bit on the workforce now, because one of the issues the pandemic has highlighted within the sector has been the importance of skills and development of the workforce. So thinking beyond the short term, how can we better invest and prioritize in the professional development of the workforce, including both adult and community learning and ESOL provision?
Oh gosh, yes. Well, you're absolutely right. We need to ensure that, you know, if we create a right to lifelong learning for the individual, we have to have the infrastructure to support that right. And that does mean making sure we have highly trained, highly motivated and better supported professional body to deliver on those rights. So, you know, we've done a lot of reform during this government in initial teacher education reform and professional development for staff within schools. And I think it's absolutely right that we turn our attention to ensuring that that level of investment and support is now looked at in other aspects of education. So we're just committing to a review of the professional qualifications for FE lecturers and support for them, but we also need to, you know, make sure that, as I said, that attention to reform of training opportunities and ongoing professional development and support is taken forward in the next government right the way across the education sector, so that we have the workforce there that has the skills and the support to make real any right to lifelong learning that the next government is able to implement.
Thank you. We've pressed you on what you're going to do, what your thoughts are. I'd like you to share with us what you think that we can do as a sector. So how can the sector best work with the next Welsh Government on education and lifelong learning legislation that's needed to move us forward, you know, coming out of COVID, coming out of Brexit? What would you want the sector to be doing?
Well, I think, first of all, it's really important that you continue to hold the government's feet to the fire and the minister's feet to the fire on this, and to keep up that pressure. And I think, you know, what I've always found most useful in dealing with the sector is the solutions focus that you always have. So looking at the wider government agenda and demonstrating to the new minister and indeed to the new, you know, to any new administration of how this sector can help the government achieve its goals. So we're just thinking about, what do we need in terms of a post-economic recovery from COVID? You know, we know that there are some jobs that have been lost during this time, which are never coming back. But there are going to be new opportunities, and making sure that we're working with individuals to take advantage of those new opportunities, I think is going to be absolutely crucial. So I think, you know, again, it is about demonstrating how adult learning can deliver against those strategic objectives that the next government will set itself, and reaching out across the sector, as I said, to try and develop a consensus of how the sector can move forward, and to break down potentially some of the barriers, or to break down the perception in some areas that it is by maintaining splendid isolation is the way that you protect yourself or your institution or your part of the sector. I don't think that's true. I think it is a collective endeavour that actually will drive the sector forward and will be better for all of us, rather than creating silos where we desperately hang on to what we've got. And you know, the sector has been brilliant over this year about responding to that. So yeah, but you've got to keep politicians' feet to the fire.
On that note, you know, I think the no protectionism, no silos, and reaching out across the sector to develop the consensus. That's quite a clear stay, David, for our adult and community learning sector. But alongside that, using evidence to demonstrate the impact of what we're actually doing, and using that collaboration, using that impact to hold the minister's feet to the fire. Lovely phrase to end on, Kirsty. I think we'll follow your advice on that particular score. And thank you once again for your years of support for us in adult and community learning. You will be missed, and that is most sincere. As I said before, it is rare that politicians can connect at that intellectual and that emotional level, and you've done that, and you will be missed in education skills and lifelong learning. Thank you. I'll pass on now.
Well, thank you, Jeff. I'm going to miss you guys too. But thank you.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Kirsty, as well. And I'm really pleased you mentioned as well there the your visit to Cymdeithas High School. So that's another great example, I think, of a fantastic community facility. I'm really pleased as well. We're going to be, as well as hearing from Kirsty, the next session is going to be focused on some of the other political parties in the Senedd. And as you all know, there's elections taking place in May this year, where we'll have the opportunity to change a government, change policy, hopefully to build on success that we've had in the sector, but also to reflect and refresh and to hopefully, try to move the sector forward. Whatever happens, as you said, Kirsty stepping down, we know we will have a new education minister. We will have whatever party or parties form that administration, we will have a new minister, and it's important for us, I think, to establish quickly the importance of adult and community learning for the new minister and for the new government. Really pleased, though, to be able to welcome and introduce our next three speakers. A political panel, it's easy for me to say, with Susie Davis from the Welsh Conservatives, Bethan Syed from Plaid Cymru, and Hefin David, who I think is on the screen as well. There we are. Hefin from Welsh Labour. Going to ask each of them to speak for 5 minutes if I can, and then just take some questions from either myself or from you as delegates. If I can potentially ask Bethan if you were okay to go first. And I should say as well, before we start that, as well as thanking Kirsty for her contribution, there's at least two of our panel who won't be returning to the Senedd in May, and the third obviously is up to the electors. But just to say a big thank you to Susie and to Bethan for your contribution, for your support for our organisation, but most importantly for your support for learners during the years you've been in the Senedd and the Assembly. So just on behalf of Learning and Work and behalf of the whole sector, a massive thank you to both of you for your hard work and for your support for learners, which I think is the most important thing you can do as politicians. But Bethan, if I can come to you first then to speak first about Plaid Cymru's plans for kind of the next government.
Yes, thank you, David, and thank you for inviting me to speak at this conference here today. And, I won't be the next education minister either, although I think I could probably give it a good go, But hey, perhaps in another 10 years or so, who knows? But I have been enjoying doing the post-16 education shadow minister brief for Plaid Cymru for the past couple of years, albeit taking a brief break for maternity leave last year. And I heard a bit about what the minister was saying there in terms of the challenges, and I just firstly like to say thank you to everybody who's been working in the sector, especially during these difficult times during the pandemic, when people haven't been able to go to their usual places of work on a wide scale basis, albeit we do know that some learners have been going in who do need to complete courses and such. But most of the people who have been receiving education have been doing so from Zoom, as we are here today, and it has been a challenge, but one that perhaps will allow us to adapt for the future when it can be done. But also I think we have to acknowledge that if that's going to happen, that has to come with resources as well. For example, I chair the Welsh Language, Culture and Communications Committee in the Senedd, and the Adult Learning in Welsh programme. They saw cuts to their budget at this particular time because the minister said, well, actually things are going digital and we can perhaps put the money elsewhere. Well, I don't think it necessarily means because we're going digital that resources need to be tightened or that things can be cut. So I think that if there are going to be changes post-COVID, we need to consider all of the issues that face people who are learning and how that will affect their futures. I also think it's important to say at the start, and I know you've probably heard this many, many times, but I don't think adult learning or lifelong learning should just be about what skills can fit the economy. I think it's about how we develop as people. And I know that many people that I've met through this time have taken part in courses just because they feel they want to do something to excite their minds during these really difficult times. So I know lots of people who've done wreath making courses and companies in Swansea have sent them the wreath packs at Christmas time to make them so that they can feel part of something. So they'll all make their wreaths and they'll all then show the others what they've done. again, you know, a small thing you may think, but it's something small that's meaningful to somebody's life if they feel that they perhaps are sinking into a depression, or that they feel that their well-being is being impacted by the pandemic. So one small thing I think to really emphasize is it's not just about, you know, what skills are in this economic area, and what can be helpful to the wider economic agenda, albeit that is really important. So a few things that Plaid Cymru will be saying in the election, albeit we haven't launched the manifesto, is this new emphasis on a new skills framework for Wales, looking at automation and how we can deal with that in the future. In terms of employment and training, we would be wanting to implement new employment and training teams at FE colleges, modelled on the Swedish job security councils, which I think are really interesting to look at. Clearly in Sweden, there's 70% of people who are in trade unions, so they're in a much stronger basis to have that social partnership. So if there is a redundancy situation, their negotiating skills are really quite good. Although I think they are, you know, they're okay on a Wales level, but there are always still room for improvements. And I know the Welsh Government have introduced personal learning accounts, but Plaid Cymru will probably go a step further and introduce a lifetime learning allowance. So this would be a mix of grants, loans and right to free provision. I'm quite passionate about, if you've already done a first degree and you want to do something again, that you're not penalised because of that, and you have this allowance after the age of 25 years old in your bag, so to speak, so that you can utilise it. So we would say starting with something like £5,000 of a grant that would be available, probably starting with those who have been recently made redundant, or those on low incomes, and then progress it as we would find the income to be able to do so. But that would be able to be used for maintenance costs. We know that's a massive issue, as well as added loans potentially for more expensive courses. And like I said, we'd initially trial this on certain sectors of society. That's if you're older then, or if you've lost your job, that you're not feeling that you have to root out that money from your savings, that's something there for you. I think, as we've already heard from the Minister, we have to reverse the decline in part-time and mature study that's been there since 2011. We've negotiated with Welsh Government additional funding in the budget for further education when there was a cut made. £10 million was negotiated recently. But in terms of community learning, that's been decimated over the years, and we really have to turn that around. You know, when we've got transport providers that are not going to certain areas of Wales, when we know that people can't get to those facilities, community learning is integral to the future of our nation, to make sure that if you live in Blaen Gwynedd, you don't have to get to Talbot for 9 o'clock for that course. You can partake in it in the local community centre, and you can develop your skills to be able to be the person you want to be for the future. And just to finish, I think Hefin will know as well, we did a piece of work on the regional skills partnerships on the economy committee. You know, we've got to look at all of that and how they interact with the further education system. Make sure they're properly financed if they're going to be financed at all, so that they can do their job that they need to do, and to ensure that we have a strong skills sector here in Wales. Ultimately, we need to be supporting people throughout their lives, so that when they get to a certain age, they don't feel, well, there's nothing more for me to contribute to society. There's always something we can contribute, whatever age we are here in Wales. Diolch yn fawr iawn.
Thank you, Bethan. And I think that's really interesting. And I will come back with questions to all three of you as a panel, if that's okay. There's lots in there, particularly around the lifelong learning allowance, which is really interesting. On a personal note as well, I do hope that there will be an opportunity for you to come back into politics. I think it's really important that, you know, as someone who's worked in politics with kids, I think it's really, really hard. And actually being able to kind of come back a little bit later would be, I think it's, well, hopefully you do come back anyway at some point. I'm going to pass on now, if I can, to Susie Davis from the Welsh Conservatives. You can introduce your kind of pitch, then I'll ask Kevin to speak after that.
Yeah, thank you very much. And can I just begin by saying a big thank you to you all. I know this last year has been an absolute nightmare for everybody, really. But trying to persuade some of the people perhaps that you work with to stick with any kind of education, I think has been a really tough ask, not from their point of view only, but for those of you who perhaps have been part of contributing to their education. You know, you've got your own pressures with things like homeschooling, and caring responsibilities like everybody else. So big thank you from me. I think this is, I've only had this portfolio for just over a year, so you'll have to bear with me if there are still gaps in my knowledge. But I just want to say thank you to David and some of the rest of you that have been speaking to me fairly recently about what might be going into the Conservative manifesto. We're not quite there yet with our manifesto, so there's still an opportunity for me to pick up something from this today, which might still be influential. But the sort of core of our thinking at the moment is that we need different routes to excellence, if you like. At the moment, the way to really getting the most out of your own potential, it gets narrower and narrower the older you get. And one of my main concerns for some years now has been this sort of, the rush to master's degrees, because actually your ordinary degrees aren't, your honours degrees don't seem to be enough anymore. And actually the routes into that are shrinking, despite the fact that we have opportunities for things like degree apprenticeships now, which is an area which certainly in our manifesto will be expanding quite considerably. But underneath all that is this kind of rush to credentialism, I think it's been called, which is that you have to have the best degree or the best qualification in something, which doesn't really recognise the experience of education in other ways. And that's something that I've tried to weave into the draft chapter that we've got in our manifesto. So just briefly to run through some of the ideas, I can't say they've all been pinned down yet, but it'll give you an idea, is this idea of rights to lifelong learning. Now, I know the Minister was very keen on this, but both my colleagues here will know that I'm always quite resistant to the word rights unless there are remedies and responsibilities that go with it. And it's a worry for me that if we just say everyone has a right to lifelong education, what precisely does that mean? And what can somebody do if they're denied that right? And that takes us down into a cul-de-sac, I think, when it comes to what we're actually trying to do with it, which is effectively make sure that whoever wants lifelong learning can have it. And that's more to do with resources, as Bethan said, and the availability of learning, which doesn't necessarily need to be formal courses after all. So I think it might already be mentioned, possibly, well, actually Bethan hinted at it as well, this idea of learning in your community so that you don't have to traipse off at 9 o'clock in the morning down to a formal college setting. One of the things we've learned from COVID, and Kirsty certainly mentioned this, is the idea of learning from a hub. We've done some work on this on the skills EIS committee that we've got in the Assembly, which Evan is also on, about whether the idea of localised hubs where you can tap in again through the computer, through IT, is something that's really got legs, because I think all of us are probably a bit cheese off now about doing everything from our living rooms, and whether this possibility of working from a local community centre is something that needs to be developed rather than something that gets cut back first, which is what Bethan was talking about. I mean, I'm a little bit sceptical about it, but if it makes life easier to get access to learning, then it certainly needs to be explored further. I mean, I've got to say, I mean, my own computer skills, such as they are entirely due to community learning. When I did a course thousands of years ago, it just in the local school in an evening. And without that, I don't think I'd even been able to use Zoom, if I'm quite honest, because it's just this whole big part of stepping into a field that you may not feel comfortable with. And that's something else that we're quite keen on, is using the current changes to the curriculum to introduce the idea of non-general, not just non-general qualifications, but non-general qualification learning much earlier into the school curriculum. At the moment, everything is being treated equally in the curriculum, but we think there are opportunities to specialise, and I put that in speech marks, a little earlier in the school curriculum, so that the opportunities for learning outside the school classroom become available to our learners when they're younger. That, of course, will need people like yourselves. It'll need colleges in particular, but also some universities. We've seen some excellent mentoring schemes from Welsh universities working with schools. Looking at this as a coherent whole, if you like. And that leads me to talk on to the, let's call it the PSET body, which Kirsty also mentioned. I'm a bit sceptical about this one as well, because we seem to be going from a very fragmented picture straight to one body that's doing everything. And I'm a little bit resistant to that, particularly because I think colleges and universities in particular, but I may hear from you in questions, need to retain some serious autonomy in this. And I'm particularly keen on the role of colleges when it comes to how apprenticeships are administered, if you like. I think there are some problems with the framework as it is at the moment, and it's not necessarily producing the best results, particularly with things like shared apprenticeships. Just a couple of other things as I know my time is up. I'm very keen on community learning being part of what you can offer to progress through the education system as we have it at the moment. I go back to this different routes to excellence, and I think what you may be learning in the community should play a greater role in what you offer to, let's say, a university when you're applying to do a course of study there. We're also looking very well. If I think we've got commitment to this now. We've spotted this gap in the progression story, and that tends to be around what we call level 3 learning. So that's sort of A-level sort of step, if you like, or obviously equivalent. And we're going to be putting, well, we're promising, we're just calling it a second chance fund at the moment, because while it would be great to think everybody can have endless opportunities to do everything, that's got to be paid for. And while I completely agree with everybody on this call that education is not just about the economy, you do need to make some distinction here, I think, between helping people to progress in careers which are not just good for them, but also for the economy of Wales, and that sort of self-fulfillment, well-being kind of strand that may need to be differently financed. That's what I'm basically saying. So this is a slightly confusing end to my offer, because I haven't spoken about things like shared apprenticeships and part-time study, shorter degrees, shorter courses, and all that kind of thing. But hopefully that can come out through questions. Just finally wanted to say we're committing to putting more money actually into the National Centre for Learning Welsh and Colegau Cymru, because we think that Welsh is a tool not just of personal fulfilment, but of economic value, as Rhiannon said right at the beginning, is gaining in importance. And actually it's at this community level learning and FE level that I think it might have the biggest bang for its buck. One of the last things we want to do is for people to see Welsh as some sort of elitist skill. And so any HE providers here, I'm afraid I'm going to be focusing our attention on Welsh language support in different areas rather than HE, although obviously not reducing the work that Colegau Cymru is doing with you. Thanks.
Thank you, Susie. And again, I think there's quite a lot in there that hopefully we'll pick up on in questions. But I love the phrase different routes for excellence, because I think it is about those different entry points for learners, but also recognizing that it's not that we want excellence for all learners. We want every learner to be able to fulfill their potential, no matter where they start from, no matter where they want to end. Yeah, I think I'll definitely pick up on that, and hopefully on the PSET issue as well. Going to head over now to Heaven, the representing Welsh Labour. So again, same Heaven, 5 minutes or so, and then we'll hopefully take some questions from myself and from the panel.
Okay, can you hear me, Dave?
Yeah, we can. Yeah.
Okay, I've had some technical issues. The interesting thing is, for our own personal reasons, the members of the panel, I noticed that this panel session was billed Welsh Government session. For own personal reasons, and the three of us are not going to be in Welsh Government after the election, regardless of the fortunes of our political parties. So what I'm going to fully intend to continue my position of constructive opposition that I've maintained through the past Senedd, and I think Susie and Bethan are both a huge loss to the Senedd in the sixth term, regardless of what happens to me. And I've got to say I've worked incredibly well with both Susie and Bethan over the past 5 years, and they are going to be missed. They really are going to be missed in the sixth Senedd. The key point for me, I mean, my background is as a university lecturer. My first days as a university lecturer were teaching part-time professional students. I used to teach the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development in the early days of my career, and much of those students, and also part-time professional MBAs, much of those students I've seen now popping up in Welsh Government in different roles in the public sector and also in the private sector. Some of them actually delivering training themselves. And that gave me an early career insight into the value of professional development. And the fact that if you are at that point in your career that you need learning, which is every point of your career, it needs to be open and available to you. And from my point of view, the best employers were the ones that funded that training for their workforce. So it isn't just about government, it's also about employers enabling their workforce to grow. And I'm always thinking of that saying, you know, what happens if we train our staff and they leave? Or what happens if you don't train them and they stay? You know, it's a huge issue, and employers need to get to grips with this. But the role of government, I think, in a lot of this is to ensure parity of esteem, to ensure that the value of qualifications, regardless of what they are, where they come from, are valued equally across the board. So the importance, I think, is accredited professional development. So the professional development you gain is accredited by a recognised body, and I would say the Education Workforce Council, for example, have a huge role in giving accreditation to qualifications. You have those qualifications like Chartered Institute of Personal Development that I've mentioned, CIPD, but you've got CIM, ACCA, CIMA, you've got the various different professional bodies. But there needs to be an accreditation system that gives value to qualifications that are gained wherever you gain them. And through that, you can grow these professional learning communities that have already been alluded to by Bethan and Susie. I think that's really important, and I think a serious government must commit to that in the next term. And one of the pieces of work, we've mentioned the Education and Infrastructure and Skills Committee, as Susie mentioned. One of the pieces of work we've done has been with regard to degree apprenticeships and the value of degree apprenticeships and higher level apprenticeships. The Welsh Government's run a pilot programme of degree apprenticeships, disappointingly not able to achieve gender balance, which was something that I think needed to be addressed, but also importantly did show a value of degree and high level apprenticeships, the universities offering them, but it was a pilot programme. I think, and this isn't universally shared across the sector, but I think degree level apprenticeships need to be expanded. Now, Colega Cymru have come to me and said, well, you know, why are you arguing for that, and what's the justification? And I think the justification is a route through from 16 to onwards through a vocational career. If you're going to offer an academic career, fine, it's out there, it happens. But we also need to offer vocational careers, and I think topping off at high level and degree level apprenticeships is the way forward to achieve that. I think social partnership is also important, and we would expect that from a Welsh Labour member. We must have a degree of social partnership in everything we do. So Bethan mentioned regional skills partnerships, for example. They can be a body that brings together different stakeholders, different people who can deliver parity of esteem and a career of learning. And I think that commitment to a strategic workforce plan for professions and for everyone in a job can be delivered through that. But you've got to engage with unions, you've got to engage with employers, with learning providers. And I think there's a community that can be developed, you know, in a way that is better than currently exists. And that is a challenge for the future, which brings me to the single strategic authority for education, which is acronym TURCU. At the moment, it hasn't been developed yet because the bill was ditched because of COVID. I share Susie's skepticism a little, constructive skepticism about it, because the university professionals I've spoken to have said, well, why do we need to change what exists? And that's always a good question to ask. Leaping to a strategic body is a challenging act, and I think it needs to be done in a way that engages with all parts of the sector, and that comes back again to parity of esteem. It just so happens a HEFQ is in my constituency. There's nobody there at the moment, partly because the building was flooded last year and partly because of COVID. But the further education civil service was on the second floor of the HEFQ building. It wouldn't be good enough just to say, well, we're going to rebadge the HEFQ building, the TURCU building, and move everybody into one room. You know, there is a huge challenge, and the question you need to come back to, and I'd like to hear from panel members, from delegates here, why do you need that single unitary Higher Education, Further and Higher Education Authority, and what will it deliver? Because if you're just going to be producing a newly badged organisation, then do you really need to uproot everything in order to achieve that? So that kind of scepticism is a good question. I recognise, of course, Hazelcorn has put forward some very good arguments for why that needs to happen. I'd also like to talk about apprenticeships, just to finish. I'm very proud to say that between 2015 and 2020, 4,070 Welsh Government-funded apprenticeships were created in the Caerphilly constituency. And only Cardiff South and Penarth and Torfaen have had more apprenticeships developed. And the Welsh Government is hitting its target of creating 100,000 apprenticeships and exceeding that target, which is significant and important, because when they made that promise at the beginning of the last term, I myself thought, well, that is quite a challenge, but it appears that is being met. One thing about apprenticeships is that the last official statistics I've got tell me that 57% of those apprenticeships were over 25. And I think you need to be looking at how you move into apprenticeships at school leaver age, how you move into school leavers, students into apprenticeships to deliver that parity of esteem that I mentioned at the beginning. And I think that's really where we need to be. COVID has changed the landscape. What are our future skills going to be? They're going to be different. And are the apprenticeships that we're delivering now the kind of apprenticeships at all levels that we need in the future? I think we need to audit that and understand how the learning landscape has changed as a result of the coronavirus crisis.
Thanks, Evan, and thank you, Bethan and Susie, as well for that. We've got a number of questions that are coming in from delegates on Slido, so I was going to try and pick up on a couple of the themes that are coming in from there. One of the ones I think is probably the most important for us is, when we have had a switch to online learning, but obviously that has potentially excluded some of the most vulnerable and disadvantaged learners, the ones without the kit, ones without the confidence and the skills to be able to access learning. So within that, how can we ensure a return to face-to-face learning to better support those learners who've been most disadvantaged? But also alongside of that as well, how can we ensure a focus on those learners needing basic and essential skills provision? I think we're right to talk about some of the higher level learning around degree apprenticeships, talk about masters, all those kind of different things. There's an awful lot of learners and people in our communities without basic and essential skills at the moment as well. And I wonder, how can we support those learners kind of post-pandemic? And if I come to Bethan first on that one, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you very much. I've raised questions in the Cynhadledd with the Minister based on conversations with the sector as to how to get people back into colleges or apprenticeships and to have some version of a plan. I even was asking about whether we needed to extend the term and what that would then mean for those in the sector, be it the students or for the lecturers or the tutors in any given circumstance. She told me that many people who did need to reach qualifications were going and were able to utilise those resources, but I have heard from the sector, notably, as has been mentioned, Colega Cymru, saying that people are struggling and would like to be able to get back in. For example, if you want to become a plumber or an electrician, you can't be doing that through Zoom. It's very difficult to show that practical work in that way. That's what they're telling me. If I'm wrong and you can do that through Zoom, then please correct me. But I was being told by the sector that those things really need to be seen face to face in a COVID friendly way. So I would say we need to be coming forward with a plan now to ensure that we can incorporate colleges into the forward thinking, because I feel, and as genuine as the Education Minister is about the young children going back this week and such, I feel always that further education and adult learning gets forgotten in the mix of discussion. And so we need to be thinking of those things, because we don't want to be thinking in a year's time about the losses a community has because of the fact that they haven't been able to get into those colleges. So we do need to have a plan now to get those young people or people from all ages back into the colleges for their study. in regards to digital learning, then that's something we would obviously want to expand in government, and we're looking at the Open University as well to lead with us on that. I think it's really important that we have a mixture. At the end of the day, there are going to be people who, for example, if you're a working parent or if you have caring needs, you will need that to be flexible, which is why we've offered this lifetime learning allowance, so that we can, say to people that if you are you're coming at education at a later age, that you're not penalised for that, and that we can have more emphasis on part-time flexible learning as opposed to the 3-year degree that you do at 18. We've seen from this pandemic, haven't we, that has to change. My sister is in her 3rd year at Bristol, and she's done nothing constructive outside of her 4 walls of her housing that she's in Bristol. She hasn't been able to have that full experience of what that was going to offer her, and so she's realized that it doesn't have to be that that thing that people tell you have to do when you leave school, that it can be different, that you can mix and match. She's gone into schools to volunteer because she wants to be a teacher. She's done things differently because she's had to. So that can apply to the wider population, I think, in terms of how we look at how we develop education into the future. And I'd just like to finish, I know this question isn't on PISA, but I would like to say we would commit to having a review and to try and incorporate the sector together if we were in government, because I've asked the Minister on numerous occasions, how do we keep people in Wales? How do we stop the brain drain? And she says to me, well, it's up to the individual institutions. That's not good enough to me. We need to have a cohesive approach throughout the sector so that we can understand what is happening, what the trends are, why we can't potentially retain as many students here in Wales. And if we don't have that commission, or if we don't have a review, and if we do have people doing everything their own way into the future, then I don't think we're going to be able to get that cohesiveness that we need.
No, thanks, Heather. I think it's a really important point around cohesiveness, and I think for us, I suppose, as an organisation, one of the most important points about that is to make sure that we're also focusing on different types of learners. It isn't just a kind of traditional learner who goes from A-level to university and into careers. The learners are all different stages of their lives, particularly some of the most vulnerable learners, carers, young adult, care experience, young people, etc. So I think you're completely right to look at how we can support those learners. Susie, can I come to you for the question there around how can we support excluded, disadvantaged learners around face-to-face learning, but also the importance of basic and essential skills within provision?
Yeah, thank you. I don't think it's as easy as the question implies, really, because it's a question that's asked repeatedly, and the fact we're still asking it suggests that there's no straightforward answer to this. I would start with a preliminary question, which is, why are we still, in this day and age, still struggling to ensure that our learners are leaving school or college without those basic skills and without those key skills as well? I'm hoping that there's some work that can be done within the curriculum that resolves some of those problems, so that we have people leaving school or college at 18, which is another pledge of ours, that those numbers will be fewer. Obviously, the big role here is for community learning, isn't it? But learning in a different way. One of the reasons I suspect that people leave school now with some of the problems we're talking about is because how they learn in schools doesn't fit their learning style. Some people flourish later in life as well, again, which is another reason why the opportunity for these skills needs to just remain available for, I'm using that word as carefully as I can, forever, because without them, it limits what you can do with your life, I think. The issue of digital exclusion is one that the education sector is facing now, isn't it? We hear, don't we, both of you, that millions of pounds worth of kit is going out to schools and colleges at the moment, and yet we also hear from our own constituents that they're either not being able to use it because they don't have decent broadband, or they can't afford the data, as well as some occasions where actually the kit just isn't there. So I think for a different audience almost, there seems to be some work needed here with actual broadband providers about how they can be supported to make sure that people have got access to broadband and data in a way that's different from the way it is now. And I know that in England there are some companies that have been prepared to work with the UK government to have subsidised provision or even free provision in some cases. Well, we're not down that route at the moment here in Wales. And the minute we succeed in doing it to respond to the current crisis, we know that gives us an opportunity to do it longer term, so that, again, either at home or in community hubs, there's an opportunity for blended learning to be a real thing for everybody at any time. At the moment, it's just an idea, isn't it? It's when when the community centres open, or if you can get to your local, I don't know, school on a wet Wednesday evening to do whatever course you're interested in. It's one of those areas, Bethan said it, where COVID has given us the opportunity to learn about how we do things differently. And while we're talking about basic skills here, David, there's no reason why we can't use what we learn from that rollout, to use the good old Welsh Government word, can't be used for all kinds of learning, including the higher level learning that we've been talking about a little bit so far. That'll need resources, and it'll need good relationships with the private sector, bluntly. And that's something that Welsh Government, the next one, will have to consider how it does differently, because that's not always been hugely successful.
No, I think that's an important point, isn't it, about the first point there about this is also about how we support future generations and make sure we have more young people coming through the education system with the kind of the basic skills and essential skills they're going to need, but also how we can enable them to update as well. Heaven, I was going to come to you for that kind of the same question, really. And I just on that, I mean, just a slight addendum to that as well, is around the post-16 commission. You talked about your skepticism. Would you see, if you were going to do it, and there's going to be this rollout of potentially, rather than a big leap as you described it, would you see essential and basic skills as being one of the first things you would look at for a new commission? Or is there something, would you start somewhere else with a new commission? If you weren't going to go for a big leap forward, if you're going to stage approach potentially, are kind of essential and basic skills kind of part of that priority mix for you?
Well, this is, Dave, this is what I was referring to when I talked about a learning career, and the fact that those basic skills are addressed at a point on that career ladder. So if you're going to have parity of esteem and a route through to as I mentioned, high level apprenticeships, that starts somewhere, and it starts at that basic skills journey at the very beginning. And if you did have a single body, that would be part of their remit, would be to ensure that all parts of the learning ladder are delivered and the learning career are delivered. And I think that, as Susie said, that's where the challenge lies, and it isn't a simple task. I suppose what I should be doing here is defending what the Welsh Government have done up until now to address some of these issues. And of course, they brought together under an employability programme, the traineeships, React and Jobs Growth Wales into one programme to develop that into an employability plan under Llun Morgan's leadership. And I think that was a very real attempt to address those issues that you've already mentioned, Dave. The problem was it was introduced pre-pandemic, and the pre-pandemic has changed the landscape significantly, such that you need to revisit how you're going to achieve the targets. I mean, I'm just looking at some of the targets very clearly set out in the employability plan the Welsh Government published. Is this statement: we will reduce the number of people who are not in education and training in Wales, NEET in Wales. There are approximately 57,000 16 to 24-year-olds in Wales who are not in education or training. And I think that is the holy grail. The problem with achieving that, it needs to be relevant to the circumstances you're currently operating within. And if you look at the employability plan, it talks about leaving the European Union, and it doesn't talk about coronavirus. But I think the response of the next government must put it into that context. If you look at the route to achieving that is, as we've all said, through community, bottom-up grassroots learning. And the Welsh Government set a target now to say, well, post-pandemic, and Bethan created a very vivid picture of the circumstances that reflect how difficult it is in communities at this point in time. But it won't always be that way. We are starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. But what we've got to be able to do is build that grassroots learning as we emerge from the tunnel, and do that quickly. And the challenge is, what is our landscape going to look like? The Welsh Government has said, well, 30% of the workforce, we want to see 30% of the workforce working from communities, not working from home, but working from communities. Now, we're currently, as committee members, investigating what that really means and how that might be achieved. And as Susie says, it's not as easy as you think. But there will be opportunities for growth of community hubs in a way that perhaps we wouldn't have seen previously with the linear commute into Cardiff from communities that I represent. So there is an opportunity there, not only to develop the world of work, but also develop the world of learning alongside that community-based work that we see. And that gives us the opportunity to link learning into it. And those people leaving school, for example, will have the opportunity to link up with employers and workers in a way that they might not have had, certainly from my community, might not have had previously. So what that means then needs to be built into the employability plan. And at the moment it isn't there. And it isn't there because everything's focused on COVID. So it's time now to revisit that and build into that vision that the Welsh Government has for 30% of the workforce working back in their communities. And I think that's the route towards that.
Thanks, Evan. Yeah, I think that's right. And I think I should probably put a shout out here to in the chat coming on Slido to talk about the role of private education, private training providers as well. Obviously, it's part of that kind of mix. Terms of
can I, in that case, Dave, interrupt you there and say ACT and Caerphilly have opened a hub, and Educate, also based in Ystrad, which is just down the road here, do excellent work in providing training and development in my community, and they need to be supported.
Yeah, I think it's that point as well, isn't it, about the different routes into excellence for individuals, that it's not just about one route or one other, there's multiple routes. I'm going to move to, there are lots of questions around well-being, etc. And I think we've maybe answered some of those around that. I think perhaps the challenge is that balance between in future about where the emphasis lies on skills for work, skills for well-being. I think maybe we'll come back to that for another session. But I just wonder, there's one question here about a kind of scenario for you as political leaders, that if there's one thing that you would introduce as the next Welsh Government, and also one thing you would stop doing that the Welsh Government's currently doing, what would you choose? And I'm going to come to Heaven first, if I can. I come in reverse order. Sorry, Heaven. So there's the one thing you would introduce in the next Welsh Government, and the one thing you would say to Welsh Government you should stop doing.
Oh God, there's so many things. And also, don't forget, Dave, remember what I said at the beginning, I'm not going to be in a Welsh Government, it's not going to be me. Although I tell you something, we haven't actually got an education spokesperson at the moment. I've just realised the Plaid Cymru and Conservatives have their education people. We've got Kirsty at the moment, Welsh Government. I suppose Llun has a role with lifelong learning, but perhaps I'm appointing myself. Mark Drakeford doesn't know, but I'm appointing myself as the education spokesperson. For me, everything comes back to this issue of parity of esteem and this career path, education and learning career pathway that puts the very basic beginnings of learning at the same level as the later aspects of learning, but also horizontally as well, that different kinds of qualifications are valued in equal ways. And Susie put in the chat a comment that said, professional qualifications are vocational ones, and absolutely right. And I think, if I'm going to say what is the underpinning principle that the next government needs to embrace in everything that they do, it's that issue of parity of esteem. And I don't think we are there yet. It's easy to say it, but we're not there yet. So I think the Welsh Government need to stop assuming that by saying there's parity of esteem, there is parity of esteem, because there still isn't. And that needs to be built into everything we do, from teacher training, initial teacher training, what we say to students, the culture we create in the classroom, through to university level and through FE and colleges too. So it's about creating that community of practice. And I don't think we're quite there yet. And everyone on this call, and I think there's a lot more people than I can see on this call, everyone on this call has that role to play. And I think when we talk about social partnership, that's where it is, that's where it's at. And having access to government is key. And I've got to say, Kirsty has been very, I don't know, you may have different experiences, but Kirsty has appeared to me to be very accessible as a minister. And I think that, I don't know, it appears that way. And I think that accessibility needs to continue. And that policy that is developed needs to be listened to by the sector. So that's kind of, what we need to be doing and what we need to stop doing, if that does answer your question, Dave.
Thanks, Evan. Come to Susie then for this one. The one thing you would introduce and the one thing you would stop doing?
Okay, yeah, it's a mean question, isn't it? I think the thing that I would introduce, and I'm not sure how you would do this necessarily, but is to breach this gap between employers and younger learners, if you like. Part of the problem is because we've got an SME culture, I suppose, and it's just very difficult for small businesses to feel that they've got influence in, and I'm going down as far as schools here, but being as I've got in mind that, shall we say, work-based learning and community providers are themselves part of the school system in Susie World, then just to give you a little bit of reassurance, I think that there's space there for, it's kind of what Heaven was talking about, is changing the culture within the school system. It has to be that early, I think, about what matters and what will matter to you as an individual, let alone as part of a wider community, as a young learner. So we've got a couple of ways, which I'm not going to disclose here, but might even include things like tax incentives to see what we can do to make sure that employers understand that they're part of the solution of all Wales's education problems. Now, that's not the wicked old private sector just wading in and sort of being throwing its weight around. It's just, if we're after people who are going to be happy in the workplace in the future, then they need to have some sort of sense of what lies ahead of them. And that includes very, very specifically getting the innovators from HE in particular working in that same environment with employers, because at the moment there's a gap between brilliant ideas that we're seeing in Wales from all kinds of sources and learners from all backgrounds who would be prepared to take advantage of that and contributing to not only their own futures but the future of Wales as well. Now, I know that sounds very high level, but there's a bit of work in the middle there that's not being done, and I don't think the regional skills partnerships have quite haven't got what it takes to do that, as we found in the committee that we're working on. And in particular, this low skills trap, this is the bit I would get rid of, is that the current apprenticeships, the framework, helps people stay in the low skills trap, in my view, which is, what I mean by that is that while employers are prepared to engage with it, they're not looking particularly to move people on. They don't see that they necessarily need higher skills in their workplace. And again, that's a narrative that's underexploited at the moment. I don't think enough businesses talent spot, and that includes people that have come in perhaps through with basic skills from community settings. I still think that employees just look at that individual and think, oh, well, you're that kind of person. That's the bit that needs to be stopped. And there's some work that needs to be done then with regional skills partnerships or their successor to deal with that culture problem. Very difficult for governments to do, though, David, I'm sorry.
No, I agree, but I think it's one of the key challenges, isn't it, around the private sector and things. So, okay, Bethan, one thing you would keep, one thing you would introduce rather than one thing you get rid of?
Well, gosh, it's so difficult, isn't it? Because there's so many things. I'm on my way out. I'm quite an aspirational person. I'm always told, sometimes I think too aspirational, and it's not as realistic as all that. That's why some people say I'm not suited to politics. So I would stop the cuts that have happened in post-16 education since 2014 and prioritise it again. I think that's why we're having continuous discussions about parity of esteem, about what our education system looks like, because year after year after year, we've seen this sector failing in terms of what it can achieve because, and I'm not saying the sector are failing in how they do it, but failing to achieve its potential because of the way that cuts have been implemented on further education. You know, I can tell you how many times I've gone into colleges when different sectors have been cut, when different language courses have been totally eradicated from the offer. We have to reverse that in government if we become part of the government next time, because it simply isn't acceptable. So that's what I would stop. In terms of introducing, I would say I'd want to increase lecturers' pay, and I want to make sure that we have an parity between lecturers' pay and that of school teachers or those in school. I talk to many people who say that they can't transition between further education and schools, and I think that should be allowed. I think why we don't have parity of esteem is that, you know, if you can't transition, if you're told that somehow you're not good enough to teach in a school, school, then what does that say for somebody if they want to change a career, if they want to enhance their skills in life, which means that they want a different place of work. So I think we have to treat those in the sector with more respect, and I think that comes with giving them the salary that they deserve. And I would also increase the minimum wage for apprentices in the first year. Many of those people who want to take part in apprentices are not doing so because it's very low in wage. They don't see the benefit. They can't get onto the ladder for training, and that really severely impacts their life. So, you know, those are a few things that I would do. And the last thing I would do is, I know it's not one, but also I would say Plaid Cymru would come out with a few suggestions to try and encourage people to think about staying in Wales if they are leaving Wales for their courses, and changing policies to reflect that. I am all for universality, and believe me, if I was in charge of the UK, I would just say, go wherever you want to study, it's fine. But we don't live in that ideal situation, and so I would want to be saying, well, how can we encourage our young people to stay? Are there ways we can give them incentives to at least come back after they leave Wales? I think we have to tackle that. That's the elephant in the room.
Great, thank you, Bethan. You would normally be getting rounds of applause now from our audience. There's about 150 people watching this on Slido, our other platform from across the sector. So I will just, and they've been the ones posting the questions. So it's a massive thank you.
I'm already standing then, isn't it?
But I want to thank all three of you for your time and contribution today. Susie and Bethan, especially for your kind of contributions. I hope not the end of your contributions to Welsh political life, but thank you both of you for your support for learners in your time in the Senedd, and thank you, Heaven, as well, for representing partly the Welsh Labour view, but also partly, I think, the constructive opposition from within the ranks as well. So thank you ever so much, and I'm sure the people watching on Slido really appreciate your comments. A lot of questions came in. I wasn't able to ask them all. But I think there's some really valuable input there, so thank you ever so much.
Can I just say, Dave, the issue with this is that we can't see people's faces, so we don't know whether they're reacting positively or negatively to what we're saying. So it's actually more frightening doing it this way than in front of everyone, where you can see it. People are reacting.
I'll tell you, everyone's been very positive. That's what politicians want to hear, isn't it? Just flat your egos. No, there's some really challenging questions there around how we get the balance right between skills and well-being. And I think clearly we are going to need a fresh start. We're going to need to build on success, but also challenge ourselves with some new thinking, whatever party or parties are in government after May. Move on now. Thank you again. So I'll move on now to our next panel, and I'm going to hand over to my colleague Martin Walker, who's up in North Wales. Martin's one of the co-chairs of the Adult Community Learning Network here in Wales, and Martin's going to chair the final panel for our plenary session today. And I'll hand over to you, Martin. I'll leave you to introduce the speakers as well.
Diolch, David. Bore da pawb, good morning, and good evening to some of our guest speakers today. That was a fantastic conversation, I thought, and provoked a lot of thought for the future. So where next after the pandemic, and what have we learned? So today, Rob Humphreys, who's the interim chair for Higher Education Funding for Council for Wales, is going to share some of his thoughts. There will be an opportunity to ask questions, and they will come through on the chat. So please post your questions as Rob and the other guests are speaking, and then we'll come to the questions at the end. Rob?
Thanks very much, Martin. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good day, everyone. It's lovely to be with you, and great once again to be at an event organised by the excellent Learning and Work Institute, Cymru. Martin mentioned that I am the interim chair of the Higher Education Funding Council for Wales. I should say as a caveat that my remarks this morning are given in a personal capacity. The HEFCU Thought Police may get after me if I go off message from a higher education point of view. And the previous speakers, the Minister, Susie Davis, Hevin David and Bethan Said, all came up with some very interesting and challenging ideas. And I will touch on many of those in what I've got to say, but I can't name check whoever's already raised them, so apologies for that in advance. What I'd like to do is, first of all, just very briefly touch on some key elements of the economic and social fallout after COVID, in particular, the disproportionate effects on different parts of Wales's economy and society. And then I want to go on to address where we are now as an adult education group of sectors, both the risks, challenges, but also some opportunities. But before I do any of that, I think it's worth reminding ourselves, as if we need reminding, that COVID occurred in an existing context. Before COVID, in Wales, we had an underperforming economy. We were still dealing with deindustrialisation from the 1980s. Anyone who's worked abroad, I've spent a lot of time in Southeast Asia in the last year or two, pre-pandemic, talking with practitioners in higher education and indeed the government in Vietnam. They talk incessantly about the Industrial Revolution 4.0. In Wales, we are still dealing with the after effects of the Industrial Revolution 2.0. The challenge is immense for us still. And of course, those effects are spatially defined. They affect some parts of Wales far more than others. And as a consequence, we have low productivity in the economy. We have some very serious and deep-seated basic skills and literacy challenges. And there's been a decline in provision in adult education and part-time learning, not since 2011, as somebody said, but in fact, for the last 15 or almost 20 years. There are some signs that the trend is being bucked in higher education after the Diamond Review, but those are green shoots only, I think, rather than a new terrain and vista altogether. And then finally, in terms of thinking about the context, I'm sorry to raise this, everyone, but we are still facing the after effects of Brexit. And those effects, at least in the short to medium term, are going to be some serious shocks to the economy and also to our wider culture, it seems to me. So where does this leave us? Where are we left after COVID, as and when the pandemic comes to an end? We'll be rather like pit ponies emerging from a coal mine after many, many months of working in the dark. The economy will be bruised and our society will be seriously bruised, both collectively and as individuals. We know that COVID has exposed and in some cases accelerated trends which were already there in our society. Perhaps the most obvious one is the decline of the high street and the change in retail habits and so on. But it will also show that SMEs will probably be even more important than they were before to the Welsh economy. We had much talk about valuing of different groups of workers, those in health and social care, most obviously, but also those who work in delivery, supermarket, the food supply chain, and so on. It's quite intriguing to me as to consider how that debate about valuing different sectors, particularly people in low-paid work, was a major feature of the early lockdowns, but that has really subsided now, that sentiment, it seems to me, and we've almost forgotten collectively about what we were saying about those different groups who should be valued more highly. And significantly, there will be a huge shakedown in our labour markets, particularly once the furlough scheme comes to an end. And that may well, or is likely to have a disproportionate effect on women, young people, and to some extent on young graduates who entered the labour market in the last 2 or 3 years, or those who are about to enter the labour market. Then finally, two aspects of the pandemic, which we've really got to consider very, very seriously, given the subject matter of our conference today. Funding for adult education is likely to come under even greater pressure, not least because EU funding of much of that provision will come to an end in the next year or so. And secondly, we know that the use of the internet and events like this have been a major benefit of the pandemic. It's a new experience for many. People have seen the potential as Rhiannon said at the very start of the conference this morning, huge potential of that for learning and for social connectedness. But there are also some challenges around that, it seems to me, and I'll come back to that later. It's rather like the debate about working from home. There are many, many benefits of that, but in some cases, it's an example of middle-class people projecting their own benefits onto wider society. Those with many rooms in their house are free to join meetings without leaving the home and bake the sourdough at the same time. Not everybody has the capacity domestically or the wherewithal, the financial wherewithal to pay for broadband and so on in order to enjoy those benefits. So where does this leave us in terms of real challenges and indeed risks to adult education? I mentioned earlier on just now, that there's likely to be a major funding squeeze, and the decline in EU funding is going to be a serious effect on our provision. Secondly, there is a significant debate around levelling up the economy at UK level. Now, it's difficult to see how that levelling up agenda is going to bring the same equivalent amount of EU funding that we've been benefited from in Wales into Wales. It will also almost certainly comprise a major drive towards skills-only forms of adult education. Thirdly, I think there's going to be an immense focus on young people in the labour market. To a large extent, rightly so. However, that may crowd out what should be offered, what might be offered for older people in the labour market. And in Wales, we have experience in our own lifetime, some of us, of a whole swathe, almost a whole generation of older people being effectively parked out of the labour market. This happened after the major deindustrialisation in the 1980s, when large numbers of older people, particularly in the older industrial areas such as the South Wales coalfields, were effectively removed from the labour market and parked outside of it and didn't even count in unemployment statistics. A further challenge for us is if SMEs become more significant in our economy, we know that historically they found it difficult to engage with colleges and training providers. So we have to find new ways of engaging that pivotal part of the economy. And then we know that COVID has exposed a digital divide, and that in itself is an Achilles heel of all the, amidst all the euphoria about blended learning and the use of Zoom and Teams and all the rest of it. And Learning and Work's own research shows that there are significant needs and challenges in that particular area. However, it's not all doom and gloom, it seems to me. And as a number of the MSs have remarked this morning, this is a major opportunity to reset the dial in terms of thinking what adult education is for, how it might best be configured, and so on. So in what ways might we do that? And I'm going to touch on a few relatively random ideas here. First of all, I think we need to find creative ways of incentivizing participation in adult learning. And I think it was Susie Davis that mentioned we might think creatively about using the taxation system in Wales. We haven't really been imaginative collectively in Wales yet about how we might use the relatively new tax varying powers of the Cynhadledd in an innovative way in this territory, or indeed in any other territories. Secondly, providers will surely need to develop shorter and more flexible courses with new forms of credit. Courses which will range right from basic skills up to courses for relatively new graduates. There will be many graduates, whether they're new or people who have had long-standing careers, who may well find themselves out of work now. We have to find new, accessible, creative, flexible ways of meeting their needs. The diamond reforms in higher education go some way to pointing the way forward in that area. But the full diamond recommendations in this territory were not actually implemented by government. So that is worth another look, it seems to me. Then we also need to explore how we can secure a more balanced form of lifelong learning provision. Balance between basic skills needs and higher level provision. Balance between skills needs and the wider benefits of learning, including cultural dimensions of learning, and balance between online learning and face-to-face learning. It seems to me that that those who want to write the obituary of face-to-face learning are wrong in terms of what the actual demand may be out there. I still think there is huge value in the simple conviviality of meeting people face-to-face to study. Then, in addition to this, providers will have to show greater fleetness of foot. Many providers in FE and HE would say they're already fleet of foot. I think that's certainly the case to some extent in the case of FE, but I think both sectors and private providers and other forms of providers will have to be quicker to respond now to meet citizen demand, employer demand, and indeed what the governments want them to do. But there are big opportunities here in terms of FE providers and HE providers in particular being anchor institutions in their communities and contributing to the foundational economy. Now I'll finish now with 4 or 5 what I might call more concrete recommendations. I'm a supporter, not an unqualified supporter, but a supporter of the Joint Commission proposals that exist in the draft bill at the moment for the Commission for Tertiary Education Research, the CETA reforms, which the Minister referred to this morning. I'm a supporter, but not an unqualified supporter. I think there's some challenges with the way the existing draft bill is worded. But I think a key task of the new Commission, should it exist, or it is something that could take place before the Commission is established, we need an inquiry into lifelong learning, which seeks to join the dots and find the gaps and secure best value from the various providers and forms of provision that exist at the moment. It's far too much of a patchwork quality at present, and we need to find ways of securing provision which is spatially even across Wales, but also addresses the new and emerging needs that will exist after COVID. Secondly, we need more research into concrete empirical research into the quality of our adult learning provision and how learners themselves see it. So in particular, the euphoria I described earlier on about blended learning and the use of Zoom and so on, much of that is anecdotal. We don't actually know who gets a lot out of it. Are there problems with some aspect of that provision? Who is it missing out? Who does it turn off? And so on. How well have providers adapted? Have they adapted consistently across different subjects and disciplines and so on? We urgently need research on that before policymakers race off into investments in this area without taking stock of the actual experience of learners. We also need to build out from the idea of the right to lifelong learning, or lifetime allowance, as one or two of the other MSs have described it, and see how that fits into the notion of civic engagement of institutions. I think we've got to step up as a sector, if I can use that term, to help, rather than sit on the sidelines and invite politicians to fill the space themselves. We have the expertise. So the right to lifelong learning, which is something that the present minister put onto the table maybe 2 years ago, and she conceded, I think, that to some extent it hadn't been blown off course, it had been slowed down by the pandemic. I think that's entirely understandable. But we need to step up and step in and flesh out that idea and that concept to make it affordable and practicable and implementable. And then finally, I think we should be more assertive in the area of adult community learning and make simple demands, requests, such as, how about doubling or even trebling the ACL budget? It's minuscule as a component of Welsh Government expenditure as a whole. And in meeting some of the cultural repercussions of COVID, the societal and cultural repercussions, and indeed in addressing some of the cultural divides which were exposed and accentuated by Brexit, ACL, which has always been a poor relation, has a very, very important role to play. And finally, perhaps in thinking about a post-COVID Wales and a post-COVID world, thinking about running things differently as a society, exploring new ways and new prioritizations of society, perhaps adult learning has a role itself in stimulating debate in that particular area, just as debates around the beverage reforms in the middle of World War II from 1942 onwards, debates around those beverage reforms, which were conducted through adult education, particularly in the armed forces, led to major significant social reform after 1945. I think that in itself is a huge opportunity for adult learning, and it's for us to seize that opportunity. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you, Rob. Definitely lots of food for thought there, and I'm sure colleagues across Wales will concur when I say learning online is not all it's cracked up to be for a lot of learners, and they can't wait to get back to face-to-face classes. I'm going to hand over now to Susan Pember, who is the Policy Director for HOLEX, which is the lead professional body for adult education and learning. Susan.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, I'm going to carry on where Rob sort of left off, really. I think everybody in England, Wales and Scotland and Ireland now needs to be really ambitious about adult education and just ask for £7 billion more annually. I'll say that again, £7 billion annually. And it sounds a big sum, but when you think of where money's gone over the last 2 years, I think we're getting used to hearing these big numbers. And the only way we're ever going to sort of level up, if we want to use that expression in this country, is without having a big influx of money. And I don't think we should be ashamed about that. And why I say that, we've done some work looking at what are the needs of adults post-Brexit and now post-COVID. And we've still got all those legacy issues that we had before COVID. You know, we've still got poor basic skills in this country. We've still got an aging population that has to work. We're not going to be able to retire till we're 70 plus. So we need to work and we need to be retrained in later life. We've still got the rising threat. Everybody says it's a threat of automation, but it actually could be, a really helpful way into new jobs in new sectors. We've also got the issue of developing our own after Brexit, which Rob sort of talked about. And we've got this gig economy. So we talk about employers all the time, but about 20% of our workers these days haven't got an employer. They haven't got somebody in the driving seat. You know, they are in that driving seat themselves. And what we don't have anywhere, I think, in the United Kingdom is a really clear narrative. So, you know, if you look at Wales and Scotland, you're more likely to have a bit of a policy for adult education, post-16 education, than we are in England. In England, we got a myriad of different initiatives. But I should say that we do have some new money. So we've got a set budget of 1.3 billion, and the government is putting around 700 million more in annually. But when you think we're 40% less than we were 2011, it isn't probably a sort of as much as we need or require. And then on top of that, we've got COVID. And what have we found out from COVID? Well, we found that people have gone online, but what type of person has gone online to do their learning? Well, it's first of all, is the person who's got digital access, the person who's got a laptop, is the person who's not only got one laptop, they've also got a couple of spare ones for their children to do their online learning. And what new research is beginning to show that, yes, people have gone online to do something. That thing hasn't turned into any form of qualifications often, other than those who are in sort of mainstream education, in higher education or in school. And that bit of learning has been in very interesting subject areas, which I think we should sort of begin to uphold as a way forward. Because when people are left to their own devices, what do they look for? They look for the crafts, they look for literature, they look for book clubs, they look for doing something, as Rob was saying, about making sour bread. And they feel good about that. And I think that leads us then back to adult education. We sometimes apologetic about that we have a system in this country that allows people to do something that isn't obviously skills-based. But if we look at sort of Rhiannon's story, her wanting to learn Welsh led to lots of her learning new skills in jewellery and things like that. So what have we learned about post-COVID? Well, we've still got our legacy issues. We've still got then new issues coming out of COVID, because when you look at the people who have done something online, they are the people who have already got qualifications. So those who were excluded from education before COVID are still excluded. And it isn't just because of digital, it's because often they didn't have the basic skills to be able to access it, even if they had the kit. And that is one of the issues I think we're going to have to work hard about. How do we get those people back to learning? And when we look at the stats in England, we can see it is that person from an ethnic background who is low skilled, who has not done any learning, whether it's online or whether there've been centres open when we've had the unlockdowns, where they've been able to go in for learning, they haven't taken it up. So what do we need to do for the future? Well, I'm a bit wary of big planning organisations. In England, we've had the lot, the Learning and Skills Councils, Sector Skills Councils, the LEPs. We've had so many different regional structures that I'm always wary of large planning organisations, because we're often, always, I'm absolutely confident to say the word always, what always gets lost is the pre-entry, the level 1 and the basic skills learner. And at the moment, I've also put the level 2 learner in that, because I feel there is a push in England to maybe say we actually don't need level 2. We can get people through a basic year and then they can sort of jump into a level 3. So when we look to the future, where I've been looking around the world is where people have been successful of doing basic skills, and it really is a local level. And I'm talking about street level. You're looking for an infrastructure where somebody can actually point to that family, that group of individuals who are not in learning, they're in low skills, and then they need intermediaries to help them into learning. So one of the different ways of doing the restructuring, if we all feel we do need to restructure, is to say, right, everything from level 3 upwards, is for colleges, it's technical, it's vocational, it needs high tech, it needs to be in a very technical environment, and you may need to travel to get that expertise. But everything else, everything that's about basic skills, pre-entry, is about the sort of the 40% who haven't got a level 2. What they need is some local structures that allow them to access training. And that could be, within a community hall. It could be within, the supermarket's own training hall room that they're willing to give free to a provider. But it needs to be local, and it needs to be where people can join up services. So what I'm talking about there, if in the local authority you've already got a group of officers working on vulnerable families, then they need to be talking to the people who are providing adult education, so that collectively that you're working with that particular family. And we need to revise things like family learning. If family learning had been operating around the country pre-COVID everywhere, then COVID for many families would have been easier, because those families would have had the skills to help their children learn. And lastly, for me, we talk about, adult learning, adult education, adult skills. What I want people to remind each other of is that it's all about the individual. it doesn't really matter in the end what government says or what the employer says. If the individual doesn't want to learn something, then it's not going to be that successful. So motivating individuals to learn is going to be incredibly important to the future, and rebalancing where we put the public pound into the low level activity is going to be the second thing on my list. And the third thing on my list is about building that very local infrastructure and making sure that we prioritise the people who feel neglected. I think it's probably the right word, neglected by society. They see it, funding and activity and focus often being level 3, level 4 degrees, which isn't their world. So we need a new focus and a new language all about the level 1 pre-entry and level 2 learner. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Definitely lots of food for thought there as well, especially I think the community aspect will need rebuilding after post-COVID and building that trust again with our partners in the community. There is. I'd like to welcome now, or say good evening, to Colin, who's joins us from New Zealand. And Colin is the Director of Adult Community Education. And now, correct me if I'm wrong in pronouncing this, Colin. It's Aotearoa?
Aotearoa.
Okay, thank you. Close.
Okay. Right. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Ko Colin McGregor toka ingoa, ko Benahi toka manga, ko the Don te awa, ko Aberdeen aho, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Greetings to you all. My name is Colin McGregor and I'm the Director of Adult and Community Education, Aotearoa. We are the peak body for the ACE sector in New Zealand. What I'm going to do is give a brief overview of New Zealand, then outline the nature of the adult learning sector in New Zealand and the adult learning role in supporting wellbeing. New Zealand, Aotearoa, has about a 10% bigger landmass than the United Kingdom, with a population about the size of Scotland. That's about 5 million. New Zealand was first settled by Maori and then colonised by the English. It's unique in terms of having a treaty with Maori, which has led to a mechanism to address past injustices. The population breakdown is about 70% European, 16% Maori, 15% Asian, and 9% Pacific Island. Auckland City is also the largest Pacific Island city in the world. We have a history of stable government, which operates through the Westminster model. Although generally considered a very tolerant society, we were traumatised by a terrorist from Australia who attacked 2 mosques in Christchurch in 2019, where 51 people were killed. We have a Labour government, first elected in 2017 and re-elected in 2020, with the largest majority of any government in New Zealand since proportional representation was introduced in 1996. And of course, you all know we are very ably led by the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, who has been pivotal in managing the very successful, to date, response to COVID-19. As of today, we've had a total of 26 COVID-related deaths with 2,267 cases, which is remarkable. Even our recent outbreak last week was well contained with an immediate Auckland lockdown and a nationwide increase in our COVID level limitations. New Zealand's remained committed to the task. In our case, this has meant the cancellation of our annual Maori and Pacifica gathering. We had 200 participants registered in the space of 24 hours. In the space of 24 hours, we communicated the decision and refunded the people their registrations. The feedback we have received was one of sadness at the cancellation, but support for the decision and how it was handled. The adult learning sector in New Zealand. We have about 600 organisations delivering ACE to around about 73,000 learners. ACE courses include those focused on personal enrichment, foundation learning, cultural and professional vocational enrichment. Many of these organisations are supported by government funding to deliver specific courses related to foundation learning and vocational enrichment. Others are learners funded or supported by philanthropic trusts. These organisations are supported by us, ACE Aotearoa, which have developed teaching standards, quality assurance mechanisms, learner pathways, and an outcomes measurement tool. ACE Aotearoa is funded by government to provide these services to its members and ACE organisations in general. And that's proved very successful in terms of developing and supporting the sector. The adult learning role in supporting wellbeing. Since the election of a Labour government, there have been a number of strategic initiatives that have boosted the ACE sector. Firstly, New Zealand is blessed in that we are one of the countries like Iceland and Canada who have a wellbeing focus to the budget. This means a focus on people being able to lead fulfilling lives with purpose, balance and meaning to them. In real terms, this means taking mental health seriously, improving child wellbeing, supporting Maori and Pacifica aspirations, building up a productive nation and transforming the economy. Secondly, government has been working with the ACE sector to redesign ACE policy and where it sits in the tertiary education system. Thirdly, the government has released a tertiary education strategy, which for the first time acknowledges the role of the ACE sector. And finally, and most positively for the adult learning sector in New Zealand, last year we received a $12 million boost to the funding. This is the first additional investment to our sector in over 10 years. This investment is directed at supporting ACE Aotearoa as the lead agency and supporting a range of new initiatives to support wellbeing. The ACE sector has worked hard to provide data to government on impact of ACE courses. An outcome tool is in place which measures progress of learners on courses, in particular in raising confidence levels and hopes for the future. Many of the courses don't lead to qualifications, they lead to a pathway for qualifications. We think this data has assisted government thinking in provision of more funding. In particular, this government is encouraging our school-based night classes, which were significantly reduced in 2010. In 2010, we had 400 schools providing classes. It was down to 27 last year. The theory is behind this is to build community resilience through engagement of adults in a range of accessible courses. In addition, specific funding was allocated to the role of adult learning can play in supporting wellbeing. As well as improving employability, promoting social and cultural inclusion, this includes the Maori language, and raising foundation skills, the government has included new criteria for funding called Improving Health and Wellbeing. This new area will focus on courses on resilience, conflict management, parenting skills, anger management, and generally wellbeing courses. The government views adult and community education as playing an important role in the current climate. There's an alignment from the wellbeing focus on the country to funding support for wellbeing in the community, so it comes all the way down. As you can imagine, schools have responded positively to this wellbeing focus with the introduction of courses to support the initiative. In addition, initial indications are that take-up of courses are much higher than in previous years. In one case, enrolment's up over 50% to the same period in 2020. Schools and other community providers are also well set up to provide online courses, as others have discussed. During our severe lockdown in 2020, the sector quickly adapted courses to online provision. There remains disparity between those who have access to devices and the internet, as also has been discussed today. This is an issue that is yet to be resolved. Beyond the importance of a government that recognises the value of ACE, there are three key takeouts for us. Firstly, this government likes data. The ability to show that adult and community education has an impact has been critical to our success. Secondly, COVID-19 has shown the importance of connection. ACE has always had a critical role in maintaining community wellbeing through access to learning, which encourages support and communication. And finally, and this has also been touched on by other speakers, the importance of flexibility. Flexibility of government to fund a wide range of courses in the future, and the flexibility of ACE providers to respond. To conclude, in New Zealand we have a saying, He aha te mea nui o te ao, maku e ke atu, he tangata, he tangata, he tangata. What is the most important thing in the world? It is people, it is people, it is people. I am privileged to live in a country where our actions reflect the same. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. Some fantastic ideas there. I really like the pathways model that you've introduced over there. I do. I think that's food for thought for the network across Wales. It is. Thank you. Our last speaker then is Graziella Sabertioli. And Graziella is the Secretary General of the European Basic Skills Network. So over to you.
Thank you very much. And Boreda, if it is right. Actually, having heard you speak in Welsh and having heard Maori, I should say bon dia y bona tarda, and that is Catalan, which is actually my mother language, even though I'm greeting you from Norway. Thank you very much for inviting me. I have been listening to everybody and learning a lot about Wales and identifying with many of your opinions. It is very interesting. I will start by, are you seeing my PowerPoint? Yeah, good. I thought it would be a good idea to have something, just to remind me of what I want to say. I would like to tell you a little bit about the network that I represent. The European Basic Skills Network is a policy level network, but what is a little bit unique about us is that we have both the policymakers and the policy providers in the network. Policymakers will be, there are several ministries of education, there are national governmental organizations, and then there are the policy providers as, for instance, Learning and Work. One of our founding members, if I can say that, who do the research, or there are also associations of teachers, or there are umbrella organizations for NGOs in several countries. So it's everybody who is working on basic skills at two different levels. And we think that that gives us a special capacity to achieve our goal, which is to promote excellence in policy design and policy implementation for the basic skills that we deal mostly with, which is literacy, numeracy, digital skills, and what you call SO, second language for immigrants. We are at the moment 83 members, and we also have associated members outside Europe just to exchange experiences. We cooperate with the Commission specifically for upskilling pathways, for the agenda projects. We cooperate with several countries trying to develop their policy. And we are also very active in EPALE with what we call the capacity building series, which I will tell you a little bit more about later. Our focus, and I noticed that we agree on this, on the incredible importance of basic skills, and our base in research is the results from PIAC, where it's obvious that 1 in 5 European adults don't have the functional levels they need. Thinking of what you were asked, some of you, what you would like to change, what you would like to stop doing. I think we need to stop thinking that the person that can read a text aloud and well enough for you to understand is a person who can read. That person may have very low level of functional literacy, maybe reading something and not understanding it, because he's just concentrating on the fact of reading, and reading has not become automatized. And that is a problem we have all over Europe. So thinking of the COVID era and the post-COVID era, at the EBSN, we think we were a bit lucky because we had already chosen 2 or 3 years ago to have a very clear focus on the issue of basic skills as transversal skills, skills that are not only important for your education, but are important for your employability, for your inclusion, for your health, for your welfare. There are so many areas that need to be involved also at governmental level. And that's thinking of what you have been discussing now, whether there should be one agency or, if I understood it right. I agree with those of you who are a bit skeptical, but maybe for another reason. If you put everything in education in one agency, you will create cohesion between the different levels, but you're leaving outside of the agency all these areas that also need to be involved. Stakeholder cooperation needs to be much, much wider than we have had till now. And that is why we have created in the network, in cooperation with the PALE, a whole series of open educational resources aimed at policymakers who are outside the educational sector. What does a person working in the employment area need to know about the low levels of basic skills of many people in our target group? So that is what we call the capacity building series. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that if I get the time. But the important issues in basic skills policy in Europe today are relevance, flexibility, life-wide learning, and learner-centered approaches. And I know that we agree on this, because one of the things that we are really promoting, examples of good practice at European level, is the Learning and Works citizen curriculum. I have heard it's not very used in Wales. I would encourage you to look at that model again, because it does tick many of the boxes of what I just said: relevance, flexibility, life-wide, learner-centered. The COVID era has put digital skills really on the focus. It is both a target for learning and a tool we can use. I'm not sure I really agree with some of the comments that I have heard today about who has been using online learning and which groups. I think the picture is very varied. I don't know about Wales, but what I know, I live in Norway, and I know that some groups that had already started their learning at very, very low level, even analphabet immigrants who were just learning oral Norwegian at the beginning and had just barely started to write it, they actually managed to keep in touch with each other and with the teacher during lockdown by mobile phones and short messages on SMSs. The level of the learner, there's not enough research about this as yet. We will have to study it. But the impression we get talking to people in the field is that the really decisive element is not the level of learning, the level of skills of the learner, but the capacity of the teacher, the vision of the teacher, the didactic knowledge on how to use, and the creativity, obviously. So it is possible, and I think that we will go on doing this sort of learning in the post-COVID era, but there are many things to look at in this new paradigm. Functional skills in digital skills, for instance, will keep advancing. One of the problems we have with basic skills is that they are a moving target. The level of literacy you needed 20 years ago is not the level of literacy you need today. And thinking also about what I have heard today, I agree that a big part of the problem will disappear if we manage to teach the youngsters a good level of literacy while they are at school. But it's not going to disappear completely, because there is erosion. Some of these young people have a feeling of failure about schooling, will not go back to studying if they can avoid it. They will not read if they can avoid it. And then it actually erodes. So you will have people who 20 or 30 years after they left school have a lower level of basic skills than what they had when they left school. So the problem is here to stay, I'm afraid. But let's go back to these ideas about the COVID and the post-COVID era. The preliminary findings, we all agree that it has confirmed the gap between the haves and the have-nots in education. The lower the level of education, the harder it has been for people to thrive and survive. And the importance of literacy for health literacy, the importance of having a critical understanding of fake news, for instance, has been obvious. And yes, it has impacted harder on the people that have low levels of education than on others. It's beginning to be obvious. On the other hand, we have been thrown into the digital arena, and some teachers were prepared, some teachers were not. Can digital tools be used for all target groups? As I told you before a moment ago, actually the answer is yes, if you know how to. So what we need to do now to prepare for this may happen again and again and again. So we need to prepare for the possibility of further pandemic periods, and also to be able to use blended learning. We need to start planning. What do teachers need to know? What tools should be available? What are, as somebody mentioned before, the problems of infrastructure, of all the structure that needs to be there if we are going to use online learning. But blended learning is something we need to embrace and study how to do it in the right way. The flipped school, the need to really flip out, I think is something we need to consider very carefully, because I thoroughly agree that there's nothing like meeting people to learn around the table with a good teacher and have the social aspect of it. But there's a lot of learning that can be done outside that space, so that you use the teacher for what only the teacher can do. The emotional aspect, the motivational aspect, the seeing the individual, which a computer doesn't do. But use both aspects of the flipped learning, of blended learning in a good way. To do that, we need to prepare the teachers and we need to prepare ourselves. There isn't enough understanding yet of what type of tool you should be using for what type of activity, with what type of target group, with what type of teacher, what suits you, your subject and the teachers. There's so much to study. So we need to create communities of practice and flexible provisions for the teachers, and start working on how to really create this type of blended learning. I told you that we in the EBSN have been working with the capacity building series, which you can find in Nepal, which is mostly for policymakers, and it's information about different issues in basic skills. We have just started a new project financed by the Commission. It's an Erasmus Plus project on professional development of teachers. So there will be OER collections, just information on the web, on Nepal, and then we will create courses, MOOCs, based on those collections. We will be working on how to design and implement good blended learning for adults who need basic skills provision. And I forgot to say that the EBSN is actually not as network financed by the Commission. We are independent. So post-Brexit, UK is very, very welcome to continue being a very important part of our network. And we welcome new institutions if you're interested. And please do get in touch with us if you want to pilot some of our courses when this project has advanced more, or if you have news for us or input about examples of good practice. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have some questions, but please do keep them coming through. First question probably for Rob and Susan, really. The idea of an inquiry for adult learning, how we join up all aspects of learning for adults and have a clear strategy for the whole approach, including pre-entry. How do you see that developing? Rob, do you want to go first?
Me?
Yeah.
Well, it's a feature of Welsh public policy of the last, well, since devolution, in fact, that the government has set up a series, in a number of areas, a series of arm's length independent reviews or inquiries into various aspects of policy. And I myself have sat on 2 independent reviews on higher education, its funding and structure. More recently, I've been a member of an independent review at the UK level on further education. And generally, they lead to positive and beneficial policy change, not least because they bring a focus onto the issue in question, and they invite input from stakeholders right across the board, from opposition parties through to providers, learners, citizens, consumers, wherever they might be. But we've never had one on adult learning. And one of the problems, the structural challenges of adult learning in Wales is that it is very fragmented. And although the Learning and Work Institute does a terrific job in knitting that together, like today's event, each component part is very small compared, say, to the higher education sector or further education sector as a whole. And I think an inquiry into what works, what needs to change, how things can be joined up better, what are the actual needs, particularly post-pandemic, would be of real value. And I'd encourage a new minister, whoever that is, to establish one of those on day 1 or day 2 of coming into office and say, produce a report for me, evidence-based report, in 9 months to a year, and then we'll see what we can do.
Thank you, Rob. Susan?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Last year, both for the whole, the UK, we had, I think, 7, if not 8, commissions or reviews on lifelong learning. So every political party did one. The 100-Year-On Commission did one. We had 2 lots of policy groups, like the Centre of Social Justice did one. So we're not short of recommendations of what should be in a lifelong learning strategy. But what we are short of is some collective understanding about what we mean when we say that. Because when you looked at the recommendations from those reviews, some of them had, should we have an account? So that was about incentivizing people into learning. But are there any of them joined up all the different aspects that I think we as practitioners, I can still put myself into that group, see? So there's things like, in England now, we just had a new FE white paper called, the title's brilliant, by the way, right? Skills for Jobs for Lifelong Learning for Opportunity and Growth. So actually it's got lifelong learning in the title, it's got opportunity in the title, and it's got growth in the title. But when you get into the document, it really isn't joined up with DWP, it's not joined up with health, it hasn't really understood, you know, the arts aspect of lifelong learning or the well-being aspect. So again, it's a sort of half a narrative. And I think that's what I'm looking for, whether it be in Wales or in England, is that we have a joined up story that everybody gets behind, that it's signed off not just by the Department for Education, but also by local government, by DWP and by health. And also, you know, is underpinned then with a proper strategy on literacy and numeracy, a proper strategy of where we learn in the community, and a proper strategy on ESOL. And if I had that, I'd be a really happy person.
That's great. Thank you, Susan. A question for Colin. The aspect of wellbeing that's fully recognised by the government in New Zealand, has that increased the voice of ACE in New Zealand and made it a stronger participant?
Absolutely. The additional funding has also helped, obviously, but the fact that we can provide courses on psychological well-being, well-being for women, even things such as mindfulness, has increased the marketability of ACE and the openness to ACE to the community, that it's out there, they're aware of it, and they're willing to join courses. Yep.
That's great. Thank you, Colin. A final observation from me, really. There's been lots of talk today really about skills and employability, and it's interesting Rob has mentioned that we need a greater focus on joining things together, and it's really about well-being in everything and joining all those dots together really. It would be nice to see a change in policy from whichever government comes into in May. And that ACL is recognised fully. It's like Rob said, we have been the poor relation for a long, long time. And it's interesting that Susan says we should ask for 7 billion. That would go down a treat, I think. So thank you all for your participation today, and thank you for your contributions and for your thoughts. Thank you. Over to you, David.
Thanks, Martin, and thank you to all the speakers there. And I thought it was a really interesting panel discussion. I don't think we've ever had Welsh, Catalan and Maori, I think, spoken in one session, but I really appreciate all your time. And this is one of the great things about doing conferences this way. Although we lose the networking, we lose that in-person contact, we're able, I think, to draw from a much wider and richer source of speakers. I do want to give particular thanks to Colin, because it is ridiculously early in the morning for Colin in the middle of the night over there in New Zealand. But we're very, very grateful for staying up. I don't know if you stayed up or gone to bed and got back up again, I'm not sure, but we are very, very grateful for your time. Very envious as well of what's happening in New Zealand at the moment. You know, I think lots of lessons for us around the pandemic and adult learning and well-being, I think, for us to take from this. So this is the final sort of bit of the plenary session. Then we're going to move into at 1 o'clock. There'll be 2 workshops taking place, which you will have had the link sent to you in your packs, but also they'll be in the also on the chat in Slido. There's 2 workshops. One on the digital strategy for Wales, and that digital strategy is a Welsh government strategy. But there's a session there in looking at how we can incorporate adult learning and adult education into that strategy, and how we can make the most of it and what we've learned from the pandemic. Another one is on health and well-being and adult learning, which is obviously the theme of the conference. And I think how we can look at what more we can do as a sector and as a new government to support well-being for adult learners. Hopefully we can look at some of the lessons there again from New Zealand around the well-being budget and how we can translate the well-being of future generations into a reality here in Wales. And finally, just reflections from me, I suppose, is I think there's lots. I was really pleased with all the panel discussions, and I think there's lots in there from the political panel as well about hopefully raising the status of adult learning, and particularly adult community learning, for after May's election. I think particularly recognising that there are different routes into learning for individuals. There isn't one type of learner that we need to be focused on. We need to reflect individuals' different experiences and the different points of entry they'll have into the system, and how we can support them to learn at their own pace and to fit around their own lives. So I think, you know, and also the reflection on the panel we've had just now is that we obviously now living in post-Brexit Britain, and whatever people's views on that, I think what we want to make sure is that we don't lose out here in Wales from the links and the collaborations that we have with colleagues in the rest of the UK, also colleagues in Europe, and I think also, as well as we've had Colin here today, colleagues in the rest of the world, and that we try and learn from each other, and we try and make sure that we are continuing to collaborate as an organisation, as a country. And finally, just last bit of thanks really to my team, and in particular to Wendy and to Kay for their huge amount of work that goes into organising these conferences. Lots of logistics to go into getting it right, and massive thank you to both of them, in particular to them, for their hard work. And finally, a big thank you to our panellists, our speakers, and to you as delegates for attending today. I hope you will stay and continue and join in the discussions in their workshops at 1 o'clock. It'd be great to see some of you in there as well. And obviously, in the usual way, we'll make sure that the recording is available to everyone, so you can see and you can rewatch anything you want to pick up on again. But thank you ever so much. Thank you to all the speakers and to all our delegates here this morning. And yeah, I hope to see you in the workshops. Thank you.